This is London, and welcome to Question Time. You may be watching, you may be listening on the radio. Welcome, and welcome to our audience here, and of course to our panel. Tonight our panel is the Conservative International Development Secretary, Justin Greening, Labour's Chuka Umunna, who returned to the back benches rather than serve in Corbyn's shadow cabinet, the Green Party's first appointment to the House of Lords, Jenny Jones, the Mail on Sunday columnist, Peter Hitchens, and the writer, broadcaster and professional poker player, Victoria Coren-Mitchell. But let's have a question from Gary Wilson, please.
Following the suspected bombing of a Russian aeroplane in Egypt this week, is it time to take full military action against IS?
Peter Hitchens.
No. First of all, it's suspected and not proven, and we shouldn't rush to do things of this kind. Secondly, the idea that taking military action against Islamic State is going to reduce the terrorist risk is an absurdity. The military action which this country and the United States in particular have taken in the Middle East and the other interventions which you've undertaken in the Arab world over the past 10 or 15 years, and indeed in Afghanistan, have increased the risk to us repeatedly. We have no idea what we're doing in these places. We destroyed the stability of Iraq and replaced it with the chaos out of which IS grew. We've destabilized Syria and turned millions of reasonably contented people into corpses and refugees. We wrecked Libya and turned that into a failed state with our brilliant intervention there. What is it that makes us think, still, after all these stupid, unforgivable failures of incompetence and ignorance, that we are going by another military intervention suddenly to make it all right? It really is time that as a country we realise that we have things.
Well, Justin Greening, your Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, said today it was morally indefensible Britain was relying on other countries to bomb Islamic State targets. The French didn't agonise over it, he said, but it's morally indefensible for us just to stand back. What's your view?
Well, first of all, ISIL is a threat to the UK. We've seen that, and we need to take steps to deal with it. At the moment, we're part of the coalition action against ISIL in Iraq, but of course ISIL's also in Syria, and we're not able to be part of taking action against them. So we've got half a strategy, which is why what we want to do is build a consensus so that we can win a vote in Parliament to actually have a proper strategy that means we can also play our role in trying to tackle ISIL in Syria. And in the meantime, of course, the other thing we need to see is for the Russians to actually be part of that coalition tackling ISIL rather than doing what they're doing at the moment, which is actually bombing the Free Syrian Army, and the Syrian moderate opposition is going to be part of Syria's future, so they shouldn't be taking action against it.
Can I just challenge that? This constant chorus from the government about these moderates in Syria. The moderates in Syria are exactly the same people who they urge us to be on guard against in schools and everywhere else in Britain. They're not moderates. They're utterly and completely dedicated to the extremist Islamic cause, and we propose to back them because actually British foreign policy is not made in London anymore; it's made in Saudi Arabia, and our attitude towards all these things is governed by our desire to please Saudi Arabia and no other sense.
All right, Peter, Justin, just reply to that, and then I'll come to you in the second row.
Thank you. I actually met the leader of the Syrian moderate opposition in Parliament yesterday. He wasn't the kind of person that you've just talked about. These are people who are standing up against a brutal Assad regime that's barrel bombing ordinary civilians in Syria. They talked to me about how there are 500,000 Syrians now who are totally cut off from any help that can be provided to them, and they need the rest of the world to provide assistance and also to help them tackle ISIL too, so that in the end of this, when we do reach a political settlement, there's a Syria there for them to build a future again in.
How can you claim to be against the supposed tyranny of Assad when this week your Prime Minister has welcomed the leader of Egypt who recently killed hundreds of his own people and runs a regime if not as repressive as Assad, similarly repressive.
All right,
how can you claim to be principled in this matter?
You're right.
You're not.
Let me just
it's
say,
nonsense.
I'm fed up with all these wars in these countries. They need to come to an end. And let me say to you, Chika, that Tony Blair was responsible for the Iraq war. He needs to be in jail. And let me say this. Jenny Jones, your own leader told this nation, she said, oh, if you're part of ISIS, you're not a risk to this country. Let me say this. They are a risk to this country, and if they ever go to another country, they should never be allowed back in this country again. It's immoral that they are. All
right, well, Chukwumuna, perhaps you'd start on that, and then Jenny Jones, I'll come to you.
Well, I mean, I didn't support the action in Iraq that happened under the last Labour government. I was opposed to it. But I think, taking a step back, there are instances when the international community should have intervened and acted, but sat on its hands, like in Bosnia-Herzegovina and also Rwanda, where I think, looking back with hindsight, we would have preferred that the international community acted. So I think, to take a view that all kind of military intervention and action is necessarily a negative thing and cannot save lives and cannot make a positive impact is wrong. I don't have anything in principle, I don't have any principal objection to military intervention if the questioner was meaning whether or not there should be a military intervention in Syria going beyond Iraq. But I think the key question is whether it can save lives and whether it can make a positive difference. And for me, I mean, the things that I'm most concerned about, what is the legal basis for the intervention? I think on the whole you would want a UN resolution. Is there support amongst the international community for intervention, particularly the powers in that area, Turkey, Qatar, others in the region? What are the military objectives and are they achievable? What is, importantly, learning the lessons from Iraq, the plan for after? And once we have been given the information to make a judgment on that, then you can judge whether military intervention on the part of the UK would actually make a difference. Now, so far, I mean, Justine talks about what the government would like to do, what it wouldn't like to do. It hasn't actually put a proposal to the House of Commons to consider yet. And I think it's at that point that we can actually make a judgment as to what to do. But floating ideas and trying to put feelers out in the media or talking to members of Parliament, formally put forward some proposals, and then we can consider whether it's the right thing, not just in our national security interest, but whether actually it can make a positive difference. So that's a proper way to do it, in my view.
Jenny Jones.
Bombing anywhere is never an answer. The fact is, the US has been bombing Syria for 14 months and the situation has not improved, and if anything, it's got much, much worse. I want to pick up on something Peter said. He said that we've destabilised the Middle East, and the big problem I have at the moment is that we are not taking responsibility for what we have done. I was in Calais last Friday and met some of the 6,000 refugees, many of them from Syria, but all from war zones. And these are people who don't want to be there. They don't even really want to be in Britain. What they want to be is back home safe. They want to be free from threats of beheading and crucifixion and rape. And the fact is, they are there because we have been bombing at various times.
So what action, if any, would you think we or other countries should take?
I think Justin was absolutely right. The next step is that all the countries involved have to sit down and find some sort of diplomatic means. They have to start talking. They've got to stop bombing. The idea that you know, the US and Russia are now bombing the same country is horrendous. There could easily be clashes. So we have to sit down. I'm not a patient person, and you know, it's difficult for me to say we have to sit down and talk, but quite honestly, bombing has not worked.
Do you think
you start there? I'll come to
Isn't it worth noting that ISIS was able to grow because of our intervention and because of our destabilising of the region? So surely, if we intervene again, it's just going to give rise to something even worse.
And the woman behind you.
I think what has failed the nation and people around the world is the unilateral or bilateral interventions of these countries, and not being, you know, working as a unit like they did with Nazis. They were able to conquer Nazis when they came together as a body. But everyone going into these different countries unilaterally, Britain went into Iraq, America went into Iraq, Afghanistan, individual countries would never be able to conquer these. So unless they come together as a body, they're going to create more problems.
And you?
I want want to say that ISIL is a new phenomenon, not only because the Iraqi intervention, the Western intervention, but now we have ISIL in Libya, we have ISIL in Egypt, Turkey, where previously we didn't have any. And that's because the West is not supporting the transition to democracy in the Middle East. The Gulf countries and the West have, as Peter said, Sisi was here this week, and this man has killed thousands of people, and he's been received with great honours in the UK. And can you imagine that? There's a risk of a bomb on a plane on the Russian jet after actually having such a security breach having happened. And he's presenting himself as the man of stability. He's the one who's going to beat ISIL in Libya and ISIL in Sinai. And I think that that's absolutely, it's not only military. You don't have to bomb people in the Middle East to stop ISIL. You've got to stop people turning to ISIL as a solution to violence. We want the ballot box back, and because the UK is welcoming a man who threw our votes into the rubbish bin in Egypt, then this is a very bad sign for the region, and I think something the opposite should have been done. He should never have been welcomed here.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have a sophisticated response to this. I think it's people find themselves in a terrible position. On the one hand, the stakes seem so high. Is it, as you say, like sitting back, whether it's Bosnia-Herzegovina, whether it's like, Germany invading Czechoslovakia? Is it sitting back and not helping when we could help and letting people die? That's awful. Or is it bombing and causing mass death and more instability? That's awful. And I feel like 20 years ago, we rather innocently imagined that the people that took the decisions knew something we didn't and were going to do something competent. And what happened with Iraq was, even if they had a secret evil agenda to take control of the region, they failed even in that. And it was so incompetent that I think it's terribly frightening to think the same sort of people are making the same sort of decisions again, and either way a terrible mistake can be made. And this is not a helpful binary answer to the question, but I hope it's a reasonable summary of how most people feel.
I think that the problem with ISIL as a whole is the fact that we don't actually understand it. We need to, to get more intelligence, and I think the only way that will be achieved is through bilateral cooperation. If that's between ourselves and the US or, people like Saudi Arabia, I think the best thing to do is attack this at its roots and then go from there, as opposed to jumping in with preemptive strikes, which are going to ultimately cost millions of lives.
One thing I would like to say, sorry, having not been sure on that, one thing I would like to say is be very careful of the idea we need more intelligence. One thing I do know, beware the politicians. It's quite convenient for the government that the possibility that IS is behind this airstrike comes in the very week they're asking for greater powers of surveillance. Yeah. They want to read more of our emails and phone calls. Beware the search for more intelligence, because there's other factors at stake that we may not quite understand. Yeah.
You sit up there, and then we'll go on to another one. Yes.
I think Pierre Notch and P. Hitchens is talking absolute nonsense in terms of Syria. By not intervening, we would like to turn into a bloody mess, and people have turned to extremism because of that.
No, if you look at the, let him finish the point.
If you look at the facts, you will clearly see that ISIS grew because of the chaos that enveloped Syria.
No,
that's why we're dealing with it now.
The chaos that enveloped Syria was caused by external destabilisation, which came out of the Gulf and was supported by the United States and by Britain and by France. In this curious belief that the Syrian regime, horrible though it undoubtedly is, was in some way, as we claim, worse than anyone else in the Middle East. In fact, that's simply not true. Barrel bombs, I talked about. Nouri al-Maliki, our friend in Iraq, has used barrel bombs in Fallujah. There's hardly a Middle Eastern state, Bahrain, in which we've just opened a naval base, uses torture and hideous repression against its people. And we have no principled objection to that. The idea that our objection to Syria is its tyranny is simply not true. And the other thing about this is the intransigence of the Syrian opposition, backed by us and the United States and by the Gulf, refusing to go to any negotiations in which Assad did not go, has prevented any kind of attempts at a diplomatic solution now for years, and all the people who've been driven from their homes and killed and maimed during that time can turn to those who said, we will not negotiate unless Assad goes, and say, why couldn't you make a compromise? Were our lives and our homes so unimportant to you by comparison to that you were prepared to demand that
right, Peter,
forever and ever? That's what's been going on. That's the reason for it.
Jenny Jones, briefly.
Intransigence.
Jenny Jones, very briefly. I want to go on to another.
I've worked and visited Syria many, many times, and the fact is that it was an incredibly stable country. Considering it was a vile dictatorship and so on, it was actually a very safe, stable country. People were repressed, but actually they got on with their lives. There was a lot of employment. Food was cheap. It was a good place to live. And believe me, our bombing has made it one of the worst places on earth to live.
OK. Sean... we've got 10 minutes more, and I want to get a couple more questions, or at least one more, if I can, before we come to the end of the programme. James Barton's question, please, next.
Are cuts to the police force endangering the public?
Cuts to the police force, are they endangering the public? The Met here in London believes it faces cuts of up to £1 billion over the next 5 years. Jenny Jones, I think you're in a position to answer this because you're on the London Assembly Police Committee, but you're also defined, I think I've got this right, as a domestic extremist by the Met.
Yes.
Is that right? So well, you're running the police who define you as a danger, presumably.
Yes, I was tagged as a domestic extremist by the Met Police for 10... I was on their database for 10 years. Now, they've told me I've been taken off, but I've actually reapplied for my file to find out if they actually have taken me off. I've been a critic of the police for a long, long time, but even I think that these cuts are starting to endanger the public. The fact is, they were so fast, so savage, by a Tory government. Who'd have thought a Tory government would slash at the police funding like that? Nobody doubts there was fat to trim from all the police budgets, but it's gone too far. They were done so quickly, the cuts, that the police themselves had no time to be strategic about the cuts. They had to sort of slash and burn, and that's no way to run any sort of police force.
And does it endanger the public?
I think it does. I think it does. The real problem for the Met Police in particular is, of course, that they have a lot of other functions, international and domestic, but that other police forces don't have. And the government repeatedly doesn't pay them for it. Assange, for example, keeping him trapped in the embassy for all those years, £12 million. Met hasn't seen a penny of it. At least I hope that's still true. But perhaps they will tomorrow. Now I've mentioned it.
All right. You, sir, in the middle there.
Oh, yeah, it just goes sort of hand in hand with kind of, I don't know, Tories just making stuff up. I mean, the manifestos that I heard of in this election just gone and you know, the election in 2010 with the coalition said that there will be more patrolling generally in areas, and there definitely isn't. I mean, my area generally, I mean, if I'm lucky, if I call the police for anything and they actually turn up like 3 hours later, I need to like look around, walk around a bit and then smooth off again. So cuts are just a joke, aren't they?
And you, sir, in the white shirt there.
Thank you. Justine, I would just like to know, the Tories have always had a very good relationship with the police, so why are you making these cuts now?
If you look at crime across the board, actually, in London, it's fallen dramatically over the last few years. And at the same time, people who have been victims of crime are saying that they're more satisfied, actually, with how they're being dealt with the police. At the same time as that, we also need to make sure that we deliver on making sure our public finances are affordable for the public, and that includes making sure that the policing we have is on a sustainable footing in terms of how much money's going into it. So we're trying to make these different objectives match up. I think we are getting there, but we've been elected to try and get the rest of that deficit that we inherited dealt with. It doesn't do us any good to hand over a whole load of debts to the next generation. We're getting on with doing that. We've got the spending review in November, which will set out how we're going to make the next set of savings in terms of public finances. But I meet up with my borough commander regularly in Wandsworth, and actually they do work very hard to look at how they can run themselves more effectively, more efficiently. And I think it's wrong to say that the changes in funding are just suddenly being put onto the Met Police. They are challenging, they are difficult, but actually people are working to make sure how we can make sure that policing in London is able to continue to be as successful in the future as it's been in the past, but at the same time, it's done in a way that has a sustainable level of funding that's going to be affordable.
Hang on, Peter. You say that it's the crime is falling, but the figures for London on knife crime show a big rise.
Knife crime is up.
18% increase.
If you look at crime, violent crime, including on transport, for example, you've seen year-on-year reductions. So the reality is crime overall has fallen. We want to see those trends continue. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that our police is funded in a sustainable way.
Knife crime is up 14%. Serious youth violence is up 8%. Youth gang offences are up 23%.
Is this because of cuts to the police?
Well, I asked this question. I sit on the Home Affairs Select Committee. We took evidence from a number of chief constables, and I asked them the specific question that the questioner just asked. Will you be able to keep the public safe in the way that you have up to now after these cuts? And they doubted their ability to do that, particularly the Chief Constable of Lancashire. And there are two specific issues that I have. We in London are facing losing more than 5,000 officers. At the moment, there are proposals to lose all of our police community support officers. We have a particular problem in my borough, next to Justine's, of serious youth violence. Neighbourhood policing is absolutely fundamental to preventing this gang culture capturing our young people.
Are you talking about the money that's provided, or about the way the police use the money? With two different.
Both, because I asked the Met Commissioner, the Deputy Met Commissioner who we had in front of us, I said, how important is neighbourhood policing, and will you be able to carry on the prevention work around gangs with the level of cuts sustained? Will that not be more difficult? And he said that's going to be very challenging. The other big issue that we're looking at in my borough is we've had quite a lot of... we've got historic child abuse investigations. Of course, it's not historic for the people who are the victims and survivors of that. But the money that is going into that is being taken out of the general pot. There isn't even a specific sum of money for this very serious issue that has particularly come to the fore over the last 2 to 3 years. And actually, if you look at the Met, of the 30,000 referrals that are expected from Justice Goddard's inquiry into historic child abuse, half of those are going to be in London, and they're not provided with any extra resources to do investigations.
Just briefly, I'll come to you, sir, in the front. Just briefly, you wouldn't make any cuts in the pricing of...
Well, we believe you could make up to 10% cuts.
Oh, you would make cuts. All right, fine. I just want to make...
But they're cutting. The original Met budget is going to be a third less than what it was after these cuts. We do not believe that the police can sustain that.
A contributing factor to our problems with the police is mismanagement of what we can afford. It is too top-heavy. You've got chief constables, deputy chief constable, assistant chief constable, deputy assistant chief constable. I'm not making this up. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a fact. We've got there. After that, you got chief superintendents. Then you got superintendents. Then you got chief inspectors. Then you get inspectors before you get to sergeants. And then look at the salary of our own commissioner in London here, £400,000 a year. And I'm not talking about the extras. And then compare that salary with that of the constable, 28,000.
All right, Peter Hitchens. Thank you very much. I get the point. I think we get the point, and we like the list.
It's a good point, but some years ago I got tired of listening to the police complaining about how they couldn't do what they were supposed to do because they didn't have enough numbers. The truth is that for some years there have been far more police officers in this country, both per head of the population and in total, than there were in the 60s, when we had much more effective policing than we do now. The reason for the problem is that the police do the wrong thing. They're very nice. They're very nice people. They're very nice people, but they do the wrong thing all the time. If you are burgled, or if you are robbed, or if you are mugged, the police cannot unburgle you, or unmug you, or unrob you. Nothing.
Are the cuts endangering the public, Peter? Is the question? We only have a short time left.
I know what the question is, but if you just have cliché politics, let politicians run on, but let anybody who has anything original to say shut up.
No, Peter,
I won't
absolutely.
Shut up. I will not shut up about it because it is so important. The police are supposed, and they were invented in this country by Robert Peel, to do one thing: to patrol on foot the streets to prevent crime and disorder. That is something they no longer do. If they will start doing that again, we should pay them a king's ransom, all the money we've got. But at the moment, they won't do it. They vanish from the streets. They only turn up after things have happened. And quite frankly, that creates a demand that can never conceivably be fulfilled.
I have the solution to this problem. It's very, very simple. Like most people in London or any big city, I don't see a policeman from 1 month to the next, but I can't move for traffic wardens. These, they can patrol the streets, don't worry about that. And that's because imposing parking crimes is a massively profitable business. The traffic wardens are all being gradually replaced by cameras, which means greater income, lower outlay, spend the same money on policemen.
All right. Time, but here, my thanks to all our panellists and to you, our audience from Tottenham in London. Until next Thursday, good night.
Next to too many people watching what we do online, and Maureen Lipman looks at claims of politics being style over substance. This week, in a moment, here on BBC One.
Mr. Lover, lover.